Moonlight is the story of one lifetime. It's told in 3 parts, 3 seminal moments in the life of an African-American man, tracking him from boyhood through his teenage years and then finally to his young adulthood.
Moonlight is a story of what it means to embrace the things that make you unique, even if it makes others uncomfortable. And that journey is not always easy.
It's about people who are not being supported by the community. And also it's about the people who help you, the ones who do emerge and throw you a raft.
It's about being able to love yourself so that you can love others.
I think at the bottom of it, it's really a universal story, you know? This guy just needs to find himself.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you're gonna be. Can't let nobody make that decision for you.
Moonlight began with this playwright, Terrell McCraney. Terrell's a MacArthur genius. He's worked at the Royal Shakespeare Theater, Steppenwolf in Chicago. He's had plays at the Public. And we actually grew up like 3 or 4 blocks from each other, but I never knew him growing up. And when I read Terrell's piece, I was like, the coming-of-age LGBT stories I've seen haven't been told from this angle. The way he had written the play, which was titled In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue, it was non-linear. The narrative jumped all around amongst all these different characters. When I think of like how I came of age, it's usually like very specific moments. So I thought, oh, we can like really crystallize this thing into like one moment when he's like a kid, another moment when he's a teen, another moment when he's an adult, are the 3 most pivotal moments, that would be the best way to tell the story. The way I describe it is, it's the same character, but he's become a different person.
Even though it's an adapted work, it's a deeply personal story for Barry in that I think he could connect to the material very easily and felt like he was reading his own memories, and that made it accessible to him. It was an access point for him to tell an incredibly personal story.
The main character in Moonlight, we see him at the age of 11 years old, 17, and then 25. And I knew right away I didn't want to cast one person to play all 3 parts, because maybe we can get the 17-year-old to look like the 25-year-old, we get the 17-year-old to feel like the 11-year-old. I mean, like, there's no makeup that's gonna work, you know? As talented as you are, nobody can pull it off.
The way Barry approached it was that these actors have to share an essence, and that if he's true to that and committed to that, then all the other stuff won't matter.
I think when we found Alex, Ashton, and Trevante, who played the 3 iterations of Chiron, those 3 actors are physically very different from one another. But when I watch the film, I totally subscribe to the idea that they are the same person. There's some connection across all 3 performances in the eyes and in the expression. I think that's really about those 3 performers and how they understood and how they interpreted the character. Because they never met, they never rehearsed together, and they never saw any footage from one another's performances.
Alex Hibbert, who plays the character of Little in our first story, is essentially a silent film actor. He says very, very little in the film, but so much is communicated through his physicality.
That's all right, baby. That's all right. I'ma just get you home.
My drama teacher, who got me to this audition to get me here right now, I practiced with her on my acting and my facial expressions. I wanted to talk more, but Barry was all like, he does talk, but not with his mouth. He uses his face. And he told me like everything that's going on with his life, and I took that and put it in my acting.
In the early scenes where he first meets Juan, there's so much in his eyes. He expresses so much fear and anxiety just without saying anything. And as a result of that wordless, kind of beautiful, poetic performance, when he finally does say meaningful things, it has enormous impact.
What's a faggot?
Chiron, he gets bullied a lot because of his sexuality. And they judge him because he's different. And I don't think different is bad.
We auditioned a lot of kids in the Miami area, and Alex Hibbert came in, and he was just so... You ever meet a person who's like 10 years old, but they feel like they're 55, you know?
You would think you were working with a seasoned actor. And he was really easy to work off of because of his approach was just to listen and listen to his instincts, and he always felt natural. In that first part, you see Chiron really struggling with some identity issues, having to answer some questions for himself, probably earlier than what he should have to answer those things. And he finds respite and advice and love in the form of the neighborhood drug dealer.
Mahershala Ali as Juan is an incredibly giving father who is also dealing drugs to the mother of the person that he is fathering. There's enormous complexity just built into that. Juan is one of the most generous people. I don't know that there's ever been a scene where a drug dealer has taught a boy how to swim. It's almost like a baptism, that scene.
You're in the middle of the world, man.
It feels like I'm gonna teach you to swim, and I'm gonna teach you to swim in life and in this body of water right now.
Ali just did such a good job of performing the complications of, I make my living in an illicit way, but I also care about the people that I care about.
Saw your mom last night.
I hate her.
Yeah, I bet you do. I hated my mom, too. I miss her like hell now, though.
What I love most about Barry is that he is a master in exploring silence and giving actors the space to speak and find the language perhaps in movement or thought. And then the language supports the silence.
The relationship between Juan and Little in the first story, that's based on an experience Terrell had, as a kid growing up in Miami. He was always the sort of outsider sort of kid, a little bit picked on, for reasons that became clear once he got into his teenage years. And the person who took up for him the most was this local drug dealer. And so I wanted to really get it right for Terrell. I grew up without a father figure, but watching Ali in the film as his character Juan, I'm like, oh, I wish I had grown up with someone like that in my life. I think with both Teresa and Juan, I don't think that character could have made it to the age of 17 without the experience he had with them. At the age of 11, Teresa is a very loving, maternal, source of warmth, but they're generating their income, through illicit means.
Janelle Monáe came down in her first ever role and communicates almost this pure state of love and acceptance.
Janelle was coming to it from a very pure place, very curious and trying to figure out exactly how to be as truthful as possible, but was able to draw off of her own experience and having lived with or seen or known a Teresa in her own life.
Teresa reminded me of that one woman in the community and in my family, that older cousin who was the nurturer, the mentor to us and for us, and she listened and she never judged. And that's the spirit that I brought into Teresa. I was a little nervous because I had never done this, obviously, and I was working with Mahershala Ali, and who I adore and respect immensely. And I'll never forget these words. Barry said to me, he said, "Janelle, there's no such thing as making a mistake." And I just went, I just relaxed and I worked with my heart and my ears.
I understand why she's so successful in her music career, because she would literally watch Mahershala work and she would work with him, and you would see over the course of the scenes, like her performance would progress. She would just pick up things and sort of like utilize them.
Oof, you and Juan. Y'all two, thick as thieves. Give me that.
I play Chiron. He's a boy who's struggling with identity, with himself, with love, lack of a father figure, lack of a mother figure, or thereof, with her being there and her being on drug addiction. Just like dealing with the harsh life at a really young age. I was able to relate to this character on many levels, one particularly being my mother went through drug addiction. For like the first 10 years of my life, I feel like everybody is always trying to find themselves or struggling to figure out who they are, whether somebody has been bullied. From elementary school to middle school, I was bullied for being skinny and black, and that shit messes with you. I was able to bring up those old emotions in order to bring it to the character.
Ashton was actually the first person to audition for his part, and of course I brought him back 5 times. This film, there's a lot of silence, and so a lot of times you have these guys, they're performing, but they're not speaking. And so I had to see a lot of him, like in a room, in an audition setting, just being and not speaking.
Ashton has, at that point in his life, he's been made mute. And so all his feeling and all his sadness, a lot of it has to be communicated in movement and where and how his face looks and how he touches and doesn't touch and receives and listens and hears. And you have to believe all that so that when he finally says, "Sometimes I cry so much I don't know what to do," you believe it.
Should I cry so much sometimes I feel like I'm gonna just turn to drugs?
I think Ashton as a performer is very good at being vulnerable, whereas Jarrell Jerome, who plays Kevin in the second story, was very just like, I'm the man, even though I'm 17.
Jarrell Jerome, amazing actor who plays our second Kevin, is both a Lothario. He brags about how he is with girls and he's been having sex with a girl, and yet there he is in the moment of greatest need for Chiron on the beach, ready to be a friend to him.
I feel like Kevin, throughout the story, is looking to guide Chiron in his process of discovering his own identity.
There's a tragic quality to the whole thing because Kevin is a perpetrator of violence against Chiron in a stunning turn of events in the second story. And in that scene, Ashton Sanders, without one line of dialogue, communicates so much about his situation. Just at the moment where he felt like maybe things were going to turn around for him, the world attacks him with a form of cruelty from the person that he's just opened himself up to.
With the way the structure of the film is, there's all this information between the stories, I mean, there's like 8 years, every time we jump to a new chapter.
Things happen off screen that are of monumental importance and they're not explained. To us, there was like a hidden power in that. You see things and then their effect is almost magnified over time. So one example of that is how the character of Chiron becomes the character of Black, and how Black physically transforms between the second story and the third story. Black is physically imposing. That physical transformation was a direct response to the emotional trauma that this person has experienced. It stands for how we as people change ourselves in response to pain, and how, in this case, the presence of love that was taken away provoked this physical transformation.
Black is someone who is struggling with his identity. He is a homosexual man who is kind of combating that in the best ways he knows how, as putting on this facade, this, physical armor.
I did not write the character to look like Trevante. Trevante actually came in to read for the character of Kevin, and which ended up being played by Andre Holland. And I remember Trevante was reading, and my producer, Adela Romansky, was already passing me a note, and it said, "Not Kevin, Black." Trevante's presence was so strong, it made more sense to me to make this character Black be more like the person Trevante.
Something I love about him in the role is how he defies stereotype and expectation. From the moment that you see him, you think, oh, I know what this character is, and the man inside is nothing like the man outside.
He's slowly backing away from who he is, to the point that he creates this whole different version of himself between who he feels like he could become, and who he truly is. And I think by the third story, Black has decided, I'm just gonna completely shut that part off. But the way my life has been, sometimes you just meet someone, or someone from your past returns.
I play the adult version of Kevin, who is, in the first story, the object of Chiron's affection. I was really drawn to it because he has an enormous amount of vulnerability and heart.
Andre Holland, in the third story, as our oldest version of Kevin, is incredibly loving towards Trevante Rhodes as Black, and yet also doesn't understand, why are you this way? Why are you dealing drugs? Why do you have gold fronts, in your teeth? What's wrong with you?
Kevin's complicated. He's carrying around all this guilt. Andre's just very smooth on top, but there's just so much chaos beneath, you know? He's really good at performing that.
The scene where I get the call from Andre was the first time that I had ever heard Andre's voice. That was, I think, my second day of shooting.
I didn't want Andre and Trevante to meet because you have two characters who are reconnecting after 10 years apart. Over the course of those 10 years, they both have become very different people, you know? And so I thought it would be best if they did not meet.
The first day I met Andre was the scene we did, the car scene. It was just the weirdest moment because we're in the trailers and it's, you know, like 9 o'clock at night, and then I get a knock and it's Andre Holland, and I'm like, oh, wow. And he's just someone that I have the most respect for as an actor. And so the love and the respect that I have for Andre, I felt kind of translated to the story.
I wanted the energy and the awkwardness and the tension of seeing someone who you've grown apart from and who you have to relearn when you meet them again. And my hope, which I think bear fruit, was that they're both such charismatic human beings that we could take that charisma, bottle it up at first, you know, and then slowly unleash it and reveal it as these guys got to know each other.
One of my favorite sections of the film to shoot was the diner sequence.
Why'd you call me? I told you, man. Dude came in. Yeah.
I remember that being such a powerful moment on set, and I remember Andre was there by the jukebox, and I stopped watching the monitor at one point and just started watching Andre. And the chemistry between those men that you feel on screen, you could feel it on set. It was electric. And for a moment, I felt like I was in the world, because it was almost as if for Andre and for Trevante in that scene, in that moment, there was no camera crew in the room. There was nobody else there but them.
Barry did this great thing where he'd say, you know, I kind of see the scene happening here in the booth, but, and, you know, I was thinking maybe you went over there at some point, but yeah, you guys will figure it out. And he'd kind of walk away to let us figure it out. But, you know, ultimately he knew exactly what he wanted. But, you know, but in doing so, he gave the actor like great sort of license and ownership over the part.
I watched that scene for the first time as they were performing it, and I turned to the DP and I was like, do we need more angles? Because, I mean, it was just so good.
I think Andre's the person that Trevante's character finally opens up to. It's the friendship that ultimately gives him the courage, I think, to be honest with himself.
I felt like in order for this character to really get on the road to becoming who he's going to become in the third story, he needed to find something. And the place to find that was in his mom, was in this character, Paula. I say that because I had the same experience. You know, I was sort of trying to figure out, well, am I an artist? Am I a filmmaker? Am I this or am I that? And I sort of realized there was this block on who I was because I hadn't resolved this thing with my mom.
Barry's mother and Terrell's mother, Terrell the playwright, they both grew up with single, drug-addicted moms. And so I think because it was so personal to Barry, because that was his experience growing up with his mother, he was able to present the role that way to Naomi, and then she was able to take that and sort of put her own interpretation to it.
I need some money.
For what?
That's my business. Don't you ask me no shit like that.
She's nothing like Paula, nothing like my mother. And I think to get to know the character, she wanted to get to know me. And it was like just a really intimate process of figuring out where the line was that Naomi could slip into this character and really just go there.
In the beginning, I found it really difficult to connect with her. So I looked into what it means to have a drug addiction. What really was my breakthrough moment with Paula was when I realized that what united these women who had these crack addictions was that they'd suffered some kind of sexual trauma, rape, child abuse, and it was almost like they were using the drugs to numb themselves and escape. And then that was my superficial in, and then it just got deeper and deeper.
With Naomi, I wanted her to really get to the truth of what that was like, and she goes there. And anytime I would ask her to go further, she was ready to go further. I think I had to have this sort of like moment with my mom that allowed me to get to the point where I could be comfortable being who I was, you know? And I think for this character in the film, it's so important. And it's important that it was earned, so you see the darkness. And then there's like just a beautiful scene between Naomi and Trevante where all the things I just described, literally about me, not the filmmaker, me, the human being, where I saw those two actors perform that thing, and I saw a genuine release of just all this stuff that allows Trevante, the character Black, to truly become himself.
I'm so sorry.
We all have this search for belonging and connection, and the story is just a beautiful journey about how you can find that, but only through another person, and how love has the ability to heal and almost give birth to you as a new person.
We all have moments where we struggle with our identity. I don't care who you are. And I think that rings true, and I think that's why most people can relate to it.
I really just hope people who do see themselves in the film just find out that we got it right. My favorite audience member just walks in, knows nothing about the story, nothing about the characters, and then the characters, the performances are so authentic that it's like, oh, you know what? I would like to know more about this world.